Well, good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Randwick Local Planning Panel. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands we occupy for this meeting, the Aboriginal people, their spirits and ancestors. We pay our respects to elders past and present. The meeting today is to consider the determination of one application. We will deal with it immediately following this introduction. The panel members for this matter are myself, Lindsay Fletcher, as the independent chair, Julie Savitt-Ward and Deborah Laidlaw as the independent expert members, and the community member is Kerry Hamer. This meeting is being held by public video conference due to the COVID-19 restrictions. As the panel chair, I'm requesting that you be considerate and respectful of each other and remain on mute until I ask you to speak at the meeting. I also request that none of you interject while another person is speaking. Otherwise, I'll have to request that you no longer take part in the meeting. The panel operates in terms of a code of conduct and operating guidelines which have been modified to facilitate effective functioning of the panel during these COVID restrictions. The temporary changes are available on the Council's website. This public meeting will be recorded and the recording will be placed on Council's website following the meeting. If that is of concern to you on privacy grounds, then I suggest you take it into consideration in your decision to make a public statement before the panel today. In terms of the code, general declarations of interest have been provided before the meeting by all panel members, as well as specific declaration of interest.
I'm in the back lane of my wardrobe.
I'm sorry, can people please mute their microphones?
There was someone mowing the lawn, so I turned off I threw the blinds to minimize noise.
Please just mute your microphone until we ask you to speak. As I say, in terms of the code, general declarations have been provided before the meeting by all panel members, as well as a specific declaration of interest in relation to the matter being considered today. I can confirm that all declarations of interest have been received and that no member of the panel have declared a conflict of interest on the one item for determination at this meeting. Having said that, I learned yesterday when I got the list of speakers that Mr. Jeff Mead is one of the speakers today. Jeff is a town planner that I've known for quite a few years, but I don't believe I've got a conflict of interest. I've had no discussions with him or any members of his staff or that organisation on this item. So in the interests of proceeding, I simply place that on the record. Can I just ask again, for the purpose of the record, ask the members of the panel if they would again confirm they have no conflict of interest to declare?
Julie Savitt-Ward, no conflicts of interest.
Deborah Laidlaw, no conflict of interest.
Kerry Hamer, no conflict of interest.
Thank you. The signed declarations of interest will be available to view through the Council's website by, I believe, tomorrow afternoon. I also wish to advise that all members of the public addressing the panel today must declare prior to commencing their address any political contributions or donations exceeding $1,000 made over the past 2 years to any political party or candidate who contested the last ordinary election of the Council. Our usual practice is to allow each speaker 3 minutes to present, including speakers representing community groups, individuals or the applicant. If you have registered to speak, your address to the panel will be recorded and we'll give you a warning 30 seconds or so before your time limit. I do have a limited discretion to allow extra time if appropriate. Our normal practice is to hear first from councillors. I believe we have a councillor listening in but didn't wish to address the panel specifically. Following councillors, as I say, there's none today, it would be members of the public and we would hear finally then from the applicant and the applicant's representatives. The panel has been provided with a copy of all of the submissions received in response to the public exhibition of the application and indeed some submissions made in the last few days or subsequently and certainly in the last few days. Therefore, there's no need for speakers to repeat the points made in those submissions. I ask that each speaker be heard in silence while they are addressing the panel and that courtesy and respect be observed throughout the meeting. There is to be no personal criticism directed at any speaker or council staff, Any such criticism would be contrary to the panel's code of conduct and will not be accepted. Panel members may seek to ask questions of the speakers following their presentations to clarify our understanding of what the points they're making. After hearing from all speakers, the panel will adjourn to debate the matter and make its determination. If more information is required on the application, the decision may well be deferred, either for a further meeting or to be dealt with electronically. The panel decision and the recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's website as soon as possible, usually the following day. There is to be no recording of this meeting other than the official recording. So without further ado, we'll move on to the public presentations on the one item that we have. The panel will now consider the development application DA 579/2020 for a childcare centre at 7 Young Street, Randwick. With 3 people registered to address the panel on this matter, and I think 5 in total, including 4 representatives of the applicant, available to answer questions. I'll now invite the first speaker to present, but before speaking, please say your name for the benefit of the recording and indicate whether or not you've made any relevant political donations. First speaker is Ms. Gil Gardner. Ms. Gardner there, I can see
yes,
you're
I'm
there.
here now. I'm
Thank
here
you.
now. My name is Jill Gardner, and I do not have any donations that will prevent me from speaking.
Thank you.
Okay. Regarding the new first floor structure, we would like to make a suggestion to have the structure repositioned on the first level to be closer toward the Newmarket Garden boundary side and relocate the garden to the other side towards the heritage building. Possibly flip the plan if possible. We would also suggest a lower profile on the curved structure. The structure appears it is airspace only and has no function. I am more than happy for someone to contact me to discuss for further clarity. Traffic. I do not agree with the statement relating to traffic. To live here, you get to see what issues there are now. The Montessori drop-offs and pickups will definitely have an impact. Parents will approach from Fennelly Street and Barker Street and most likely via Middle Street. Gridlock will happen. I foresee drivers being impatient with each other. Adding calming measures will not resolve future problems. More gridlock. I also envision frustrated drivers using the road within Newmarket Complex as a short-term parking and as a shortcut to go around the gridlock. This will cause a danger for all. This road is for access for delivery trucks and vehicles into the car park for Newmarket residents at the front. The waste room. Ideally, the waste room should be relocated within Montessori Complex away from the residents at the north end of Newmarket building. My suggestion would be moved to the other end of the new building or down between the wall bordering on Newmarket Central Garden and the building. I noticed in the report that reference is made to previous DA 93/2018. On 2 occasions, comparisons have been made to this DA. Regardless of approval of previous DA, no comparison should be made as there was no one in Newmarket to object to the application at the time. The current DA 579 should be judged on its own merits and subsequent 36 objections. Comparisons can be located in the issues reference to overshadowing at the north end and the 2.8 metre wall, and the demolition of sections of heritage listed building. Please note, further in the report, mention is made this is not considered a valid concern as every DA is assessed on its own merits. This statement was mentioned in relation to setting a precedence for other heritage listed buildings in the vicinity. Statement is contradictory. I would like to believe that the previous DA will not be used should the current DA fails. Visibility of intended building from Young Street. Issue is not just Young Street. It is from the apartments at the north end of the building and from the Newmarket Central Garden and the playground to Inglis Park. No mention has been made relating to spotlights for security. Where will they be positioned? I would like to believe they will be positioned away from the north end of the Carrington building so as not to shine into windows. In closing,
Please proceed then.
okay. In closing, we would like some compromise and interaction with residents so a favourable result can be achieved. I thank you for the opportunity to address the panel.
Thank you, Jill, and I apologise for mispronouncing your name.
That's fine.
We have Mr. Mead speaking on behalf of the applicant, but with him to answer questions are both the architect and traffic consultant. So I expect they would take on board those questions and hopefully respond. So Thank you for that.
Thank you.
The next speaker we have is Mr. Lachlan Rogers. Mr. Rogers, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Please proceed.
So I'm Lachlan Rogers from the Planning Hub. So I've been engaged to object to the proposal on behalf of the Owners Corporation of Fig Tree Pocket, located to the south and the southwest of the subject site. We lodged a formal written objection in November of last year. I note that the application has since been amended. However, this amended documentation wasn't provided for re-notification and wasn't made publicly available, so we haven't had an opportunity to review that. But I note that the amended application only reduced the capacity of the childcare centre from 91 to 86 children, so our key concerns with the proposal remain. So based on that, our key issues with the proposal are that it will result in unacceptable heritage impacts. So the subject site is an existing heritage item and it's surrounded by state and local heritage items. So the proposal proposes the adaptive reuse of the site. Now, it is noted that in the DCP that there is provisions allowing for the adaptive reuse, but it references cafes or restaurants or retail development or the like. It doesn't envisage an intensification of such a scale for a childcare centre on the site. The alterations and additions for the adaptive reuse will result in significant impacts on the heritage item. So it involves the partial demolition of a single-storey addition on the western elevation. So that western elevation is identified as having a high level of significance in the Newmarket Conservation Management Plan prepared for the site. So the works are considered to be excessive and detrimental to the heritage item based on the level of significance for the portion of the building and its overall contribution to the heritage character of the site. The demolition is proposed to accommodate vehicular access and basement car parking and is a direct result of the applicant trying to maximise the capacity of the centre and comply with the relevant car parking requirements based on the capacity. So it's considered to be unnecessary and detrimental to the heritage character of the item. This is contrary to Council's DCP, where it says demolition of a heritage item in a conservation area is generally not supported unless there's overriding reasons such as structural damage. So the purpose of the demolition to only accommodate basement car parking is not considered to be a reasonable reason for that demolition. In addition, it's contrary to another section of Randwick's DCP, which details that existing building fabric, including verandas and balconies, must not be altered to allow for the provision of car parking. So therefore, the demolition is considered to be detrimental to the character of the heritage item and not considered to be reasonable to support the proposed development. In addition to that, the proposed development and the alterations and additions result in a visual impact on the heritage character of the site, so they're considered to be significant. I've just been given my time limit. Our other key issues are obviously resulting in the traffic. So currently the area and the nearby intersections are failing, and that was based on a report done for the overall area, which did not envisage this site to be used for the purpose of a childcare centre with a capacity of 91 children, which is now 86 children. So it'll result in significant traffic impacts and safety issues surrounding that. In addition, there's also going to be significant amenity impacts from the proposal, such as acoustic impacts on the surrounding residential properties. And given the time limit, that's all for our objection.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Can I just say, as I mentioned to Ms. Gardner, that the applicant has with them a number of experts, including their heritage consultants, so they may well take on board or hopefully respond to the concern you've raised. Can I actually pause at this point to ask panel members whether they have any questions of either of the two speakers? I should have done that earlier.
Not
No
me.
question.
Okay, thank you.
I just, it's Kerry Hamer speaking. I
Kerry.
just wondered if Lachlan had any other significant objections that he wanted to raise, because I am aware that if this is an opportunity for the other side to hear issues, I wondered if it was appropriate to ask if there were any other quick, significant things.
Yeah, I have a few other items if you'll allow me the time to go through them. So,
But I have to put that through to the chair. Sorry.
Are they items that were covered in your initial response? You indicated you detailed quite a number of items in that. We've all had the opportunity to read that. And whilst I appreciate the amended plans weren't re-notified, if the additional matters you're raising are still relevant or haven't been addressed by the amended thing, I'll give you another couple of minutes to quickly respond to those.
Yeah, that'd be appreciated. So one of the key items that actually wasn't in our original written submission, I'll raise as well. So I'll just go through over two additional points. So as I noted, the DCP allows for the adaptive reuse of the site. However, this is to be considered with the visual, I guess, significance of the site with the surrounding area, and the significant alterations and additions impact the view corridors to the item and don't allow for the appropriate interpretation of the heritage character of the area from surrounding properties. The adaptive reuse detailed in the DCP looks for the activation of that on the street frontage to allow for the public to interpret the heritage item. The demolition proposed for the basement car parking is contrary to this aim and objective of the DCP. And in addition to that, the second point is that the application submitted has failed to address the design excellence provisions of the LEP, which relate to the site, with two of those key design excellent points being whether the form and external appearance of the development will improve the quality and amenity of the public domain. Given the significant alterations and additions, I don't believe it satisfies this provision, given it doesn't allow for the appropriate interpretation of the heritage item from all elevations, and it also will not improve the quality and amenity of the public domain when viewed from surrounding properties and also surrounding heritage items. And then the other key point being whether the proposed development detrimentally impacts on view corridors and landmarks. And as I've just detailed, so there's a heritage item located just behind, which is the public park. The significant alterations and additions to the site will not allow for the appropriate interpretation of the existing heritage item from that public space, and it'll form a new contemporary design. So it doesn't allow for appropriate interpretation or appreciation of the character of the site.
Thank you. Does that additional comment raise any questions from panel members? I'm getting a shake of head. So thank you for that. I also have Mr. Rob Cardos, I understand, available to answer questions. So is there any questions from members of the panel in relation to the submissions that have been made?
Could I just ask in what capacity is Mr. Canos, please? What's his expertise?
No, I think Mr. Cardos is a resident.
A resident, right? Okay, thank you.
Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Cardos is a resident.
Thank you.
He's currently on mute, but he's a resident.
Thank you.
Okay, that being the case, we'll move on to our next.
He had his hand up.
Yeah, he hasn't registered to speak.
Oh, right.
He's there to answer questions if there are any from the panel. He wasn't in time to register to speak, and we already had two speakers against. The next speaker is Mr. Jeff Mead on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Mead, can I invite you, and again, please indicate your name for the benefit of the recording and indicate whether or not you've made any political donations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeff Mead, Consultant Town Planner for the applicant. I confirm that myself and my firm have not made any political donations.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity of speaking. As you alluded to earlier, I have a team of experts on behalf of the applicant here. Of course, this application raises a number of issues of expertise, including traffic, acoustics, heritage, and so on. And for the benefit of the panel, we have those experts here. I will deal very quickly with some of the items that have been raised, and then may ask the panel if there's any specific issues of the other experts, rather than having each of them take time to make their own addresses. At the outset, I note that this has been an application that's been the subject of rigorous discussion with council staff and their consultants throughout the application process, starting with pre-application discussions and through amendments being made during the assessment process for the application. Of significance to most of those discussions has been the question of heritage impact. As you'll see in the staff report, there's in fact an 8-page heritage assessment undertaken by council's consultant, and that concludes that the heritage impacts of the proposal are acceptable. And so in those terms, I defer for any questions to our heritage consultant, James Phillips, rather than me pretending to be a heritage expert. In terms of the assessment report deals in quite a bit of detail with the objections that have been raised, both in the submissions made in response to notification, but also cover the issues that have been raised today. In fact, I haven't heard any new issues that warrant a direct response in their own right, beyond how they've been dealt with in the assessment report. The applicant agrees with the recommendation of the report, and we accept all the conditions therein that have been put forward. I note there are conditions that deal specifically with acoustics and heritage matters, and also require some updates to the plan of management that was submitted with the DA. As the panel would have seen, there's a detailed plan of management, in fact 60 pages of plan of management that detail all the operational requirements that our client will be required to address in perpetuity on a daily basis. And in particular, the plan of management is quite rigorous in terms of acoustic control, both in terms of limiting capacities for the outdoor play areas and also the hours within which they are used. The plan of management drafts those provisions on the basis of the acoustic report. I see my time's up, so I won't keep going. As I said, we accept the recommendation, we accept the conditions. It may be worthwhile putting it back to the panel as to whether there's any specific questions that we could assist with.
I will do that in a moment, but perhaps before we do that, I might afford the opportunity to your architect, Mr. Andrew Daly, to respond particularly to the suggested design changes that came from Ms. Jill Gardner, and perhaps after that your heritage consultant to respond to the second speaker's concerns on heritage impact. If I can do that briefly, I will then invite members of the panel to ask any other questions, so they may get a further opportunity to comment.
Thank you.
Yes, my name is Andrew Daly. I'm the architect, and confirming I have no political donations made. Without really having a chance to look at the suggestion, I'd be very happy to look at it, but without having significant opportunity to review that, I'm not sure what the benefit will significantly offer. I think it might produce further overshadowing to the northeastern corner of the building to the south in a negative way. Regardless of comments as to whether the prior DA should form a precedent or not, the proposed envelope of the upper story sits fully within the proposed and approved prior DA, therefore limiting any overshadowing or any additional changing or overshadowing resulting from that upper story roof form, and that is a key design driver of why we have done the design the way we have. I will briefly address the design excellence comments raised by, I think it was Lachlan, sorry. This proposal did go through the Randwick Internal Design Excellence Panel and was reviewed by a number of heritage specialists and architects during that process. We went through quite a rigorous round of feedback with that Design Excellence Panel, which resulted in changes and reductions to the design. Although the number may have only gone from 94 to 86. That's a significant reduction, almost 10%, and it was a similar reduction in the building envelope, which we were able to offer through that process. So we're very confident the design will give a very, very positive urban response to the area, is very much in line with the master planning of the community and the quality architecture of the community there, which we think it is a very high quality precinct. That's sort of my comments at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Given what you've just said, it may not be necessary for Mr. Phillips to respond specifically on heritage. Matter for you, Mr. Mead, whether you feel that's necessary.
I don't think it is, Mr. Chair, just to the extent, as I said, the assessment report has an 8-page assessment of the heritage impacts of the proposal, and they stem from a number of design changes being made throughout the process. So unless there's anything specific, our submission is that the application has been through a rigorous heritage assessment.
Thank you. That being the case, I'll throw it over to members of the panel. Do you have any questions of either Mr. Mead or any of the experts he has available? The architect you've heard from, his heritage consultant, Mr. Cooper, acoustics, and Mr. Steele, traffic and parking issues. So all of those people are available should you have any questions on those issues.
I just had a few.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah.
Of Mr. McLaren, Mr. Cooper, Mr. Mead. Mr. McLaren, I can't see you there.
I think it's Mr. Steele is speaking on behalf of McLaren Traffic Engineering.
Okay, sorry. There's some concern raised in the resident submissions that the traffic surveys were done at an unrepresentative time during obviously COVID, which we can't unfortunately do much about. But also that residents hadn't moved in, activities in the park hadn't met their current level of usage. Would you like to, or could you respond to that and explain how you have adjusted the survey results and how those circumstances at the date when the survey was undertaken have been adjusted for?
Of course, yes. I can try to address those points. As you mentioned, it's very difficult to provide much of an overlook of the effects on traffic as a result of COVID. We did our surveys in September of 2020, which was a period of time when I don't believe Sydney was under any specific lockdown conditions. But of course, there has been an effect on transport throughout the city since about March of 2020, which has been something that we've had to try to deal with all our work. In terms of how we tried to validate the data that we did get, we compared it to the data that was collected for the applications surrounding the site for the residential uplift, and found it to be generally consistent with that. From that point, we did our modelling, which reflected that there was no impact on the surrounding intersections as a result of the childcare centre. And if I can say something further, the traffic generation rates that we use for the childcare centre are based on rates in the RMS Guide to Traffic Generating Developments, which are based on surveys of sites in low density areas. This childcare centre will be in the middle of a high density residential precinct. There's also a number of schools in the surrounds, and those factors mean that there will be a much lesser rate of driving to the site than would be reflected by our modelling, and therefore I would say that what we have done is conservative rather than underestimating the impact.
Okay. And just one other question on traffic matters. I don't know if anybody, other panel members do. There's the issue about the turning template in the garage and suggesting that the turning circle be removed. You believe that's justified? Is it possible to manoeuvre without the use of that dedicated area. Could you explain that manoeuvre and also address the concern that someone that would necessitate a car if it got down to the end of the parking garage and found there wasn't a parking spot, having to reverse back through the car park, especially if there isn't a dedicated pathway there for the children on that western side?
Of course. I guess to give a bit of background on this, initially we did not have a turning bay, and that was requested by council that it would be preferable to have that turning bay in lieu of a parking space. And now I understand that the council position has changed to say that they prefer that we have the full provision of 18 parking spaces without the turning bay. And whether or not the panel agrees with that condition is up to you. But the manoeuvre that we've shown in the car park, in the sweat path testing, which is part of our report, and also the letter in response to council on the last page, it shows that a vehicle can reverse back, we'd estimate about 10 metres to make a 3-point turn in the basement. And while that may seem like an excessively long reversing manoeuvre, it's probably only something that would take maximum of 3 or 4 seconds to do, and would have very little impact on anyone entering the basement. And to your point that someone might get right to the end of the aisle, my point of view would be that you'd be able to see almost immediately when you turn left into the basement whether there are parking spaces available, and that's the point at which you would make the decision to turn around and exit.
Did you look at maybe a traffic light system to show that the car park was full, so someone wouldn't enter it in the first place, maybe?
Sure. I mean, we have suggested those systems on other basements where there is a restricted number of spaces available, or similar to this, there is a lack of turning facilities. And I can't speak for the applicant, but I don't see why a condition requiring a dynamic parking display, which displays how many parking spaces are available in the car park, would be refuted.
And just one final thing on that point then, if we were to decide that if it was approved that the turning space should be provided, so you're one car space short, what does that translate to in terms of capacity, number of children?
It would not have an effect on the number of children that could be accommodated. So the way we assess the number of children that can be accommodated based on parking is based on queuing, and the number of spaces that we've proposed is more than enough in terms of...
Isn't it based on a DCP? Wasn't it 1 per 7 or something?
It's 1 per 8, yes, according to the DCP. And
but
strictly...
if you lost one car space, then doesn't that mean 8 less children?
Strictly according to the DCP, yes. The DCP rate would indicate that we can have 1 less child, or sorry, not one, a lesser number of children if there was 1 space less in the car park. But the effectiveness of those spaces is not predicated on the DCP. The actual function is based on the way by which people enter and exit the car park, the length of time they stay, which can then be translated into a queue length, a 98th percentile queue, which is the number of car spaces that are actually needed. And in this case, the loss of 1 car space would still provide adequate number of car spaces to service the 98th percentile queue.
So you're saying that the DCP requirement is conservatively high, is that what you're saying? That
Yes,
it's above
yes.
the estimated level of usage if you based it on number of arrivals and queuing time and time spent taking children up to the childcare, is that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah, to put it succinctly, yes.
Okay. So I had a couple for does anybody else before? Maybe it might be more useful if anybody who wished to ask traffic did so now, or
well, you've asked the question I was concerned about, the turning bay. I just want to clarify, though, your earlier comment that when you've assessed the impact on traffic, I take it you've not relied upon what the current traffic flow is, but rather you've modelled it against the future development scenarios.
Being the future development, as in the uplift of the surrounding area?
Yes. Yeah. So obviously there's vacant blocks still there. There's further development to occur. The question is, and that's been modelled previously as part of the uplift studies. The question is, what's the impact of the additional traffic from this childcare centre on that projected ultimate traffic flow?
Okay, so we did go and look through all those studies that were done previously for the surrounding uplift, and we took what we could from those to attempt to do the future case. The difficulty that we ran into was that the studies that were done for that surrounding residential precinct were of a much greater complexity and much greater scale than what we could model with data that we had. If you're modeling a bigger project like that, you'll use a network model, and we did not have the parameters that we used in that model, such that any estimates we could make would be inevitably wrong. So we did go and try to attempt the cumulative assessment, but we didn't have enough information to do it accurately.
Okay, thank you. That may well be a question for the council staff, but that's fine. So any further questions on traffic? Kerry's got a hand up.
I have. You just said length of time. How long do you factor in that a person drives in, parks, empties the child out, goes up to reception, signs in, etc., and then returns?
So the length of time is based on an average derived from a bunch of surveys of childcare centres that were done to inform the RMS Guide to Traffic Generating Developments. Mm-hmm. And that time period is just over 6 minutes.
6 minutes. And do those surveys include places with a lift?
They surveyed a range of different centres. I think some of them were had basement parking and a lift, and some of them had at-grade car parking. Okay.
And I noticed that you estimated in the morning 37 in and 36 out. Can you explain to me, is that per hour? How does that work?
That's right. That's per hour.
Per hour. So does that mean, over 3 hours when you say that AM period?
So that will be the peak hour, and then the hours other than that peak hour will have a lesser rate of traffic generation.
Okay, so the peak hour being anywhere from 7 to 9 or 10 o'clock.
That's right.
Plus the other. All right, so 37. Okay, thank you. I also was worried about the cumulative impact of the future developments in the area because I am a resident of the area and I am aware of the amount of traffic that's generated, especially with the schools and the hospital, and just people trying to go north generally in that area.
Okay, any further questions from panel members?
If we finish,
on traffic. On traffic.
Not on traffic.
I just have one arising because Mr. Steele said he couldn't speak for the applicant, so I'll ask Mr. Mead. Is a condition, or would a condition requiring appropriate traffic light system to be installed acceptable to the applicant?
Yes, it would be.
Thank you. Okay. Panel members, questions of moving on to any other matters?
Well, I have one with Mr. Cooper, which is a similar question directed to Mr. Steele, which is the concern raised that the noise logging and surveying was done at a period that didn't reflect the likely current or future scenario having been affected by various COVID scenarios, and I wondered if you could address that and again go through the same exercise and saying how the survey and logging information was adjusted to take into account those unusual circumstances. And also, while you're doing that, if you could just clarify that noise logging was taken at the upper levels of the building to the east, at the more elevated levels, given there's an elevated play area on that side of the development.
Good. Is Mr. Cooper there?
I thought he was, Mr. Chair, that it appears...
There's a number of phone numbers rather than names, so I'm just not sure whether Mr. Cooper is there.
It may have dropped off.
Mr. Mead, you might try and give him a call and see whether you can get him back online. In the meantime, we might move on to any other questions. That is not on acoustics. Was there any questions on heritage or landscaping architecture?
Chair, I have some questions on landscaping.
Thank you, Julie.
So my question relates to the planting along the southern boundary of the site that's labelled as fringe planting to boundary on the landscape plan. And I'm just wondering what actual plants are proposed for that southern boundary and the mature height of those plants, given the issue that has been raised from residents of that building and views across to the site, and whether it's of a height that will provide some benefit and some screening, or whether it's of a much lower height. Because when I look at the planting schedule, the highest plant there is 3 metres, mature height of 3 metres. If someone could, I know you don't have your landscape architect, but is someone able to respond to that?
I might be able to respond to that one. Sorry, was the query whether they will be tall and therefore provide some screening opportunity?
Yes.
If that's what's been indicated on the landscape plan, that's what we fully intend to plant. I would also note
that's
that...
not what's indicated. What's indicated, the landscape plan just says fringe planting to boundary and provides a planting schedule, but it doesn't say what is going in that boundary.
Particular location.
And therefore I wanted to know what the height would be to see whether in fact it is just decorative boundary planting or whether it has some screening purpose.
I believe in that case it would be just decorative low-level planting. I would also note that there's a 1.5 metre tall boundary wall that exists on that southern wall, and there are no windows on the southern facade of the lower floor of the childcare centre that do not have another kind of privacy screening over them. So there are two or three windows on that southern facade which have aluminium privacy louvers over them. So any views from those lower rooms would be directed down towards the garden, not up into the apartments. Then there's the 1.5 metre wall. Then there is, as I have seen from the planning assessment report, there is already magnolias planted on the southern side of that wall in the apartment building. So I believe there are some photos of that in the assessment report, unless I misunderstood what they were. But in addition to the 1.5 metre wall, there is privacy screening on the southern windows at the lower level, and there are no southern facing windows on the upper level whatsoever from the extensions.
Yes, there are windows in the apartment in the neighbouring lot, and it may be beneficial for them to have some higher green screen planting just to soften the overall look rather than
Absolutely.
A building.
I think we'd be open to that if there was potentially a condition to that effect. The main challenge might be that as we're in that area over the basement, achieving significant deep soil planting might be a challenge. But as we're not relying upon it as outdoor playground area, so the kids will not access that for outdoor play, it's purely a decorative landscaping fringe, we may be able to increase the height of the sort of planting bed over the basement there to accommodate some taller trees. I think that could be achieved.
Yes, and indeed it may not be trees per se, it might be more hedge planting, but to get some height, certainly above the 1.5 concrete wall, but then higher as well.
I think something like that could be accommodated, yeah.
Thank you. Chair, that's all I have.
Yeah, just to clarify, I understood from the report that concrete wall that you refer to on the neighbouring property, I understood it was more than 1.5.
It's got 2.2, I think.
Yeah, it's 2.2 from the floor level of the apartment side, and it's 1.5 from the floor level of our side.
From the floor level and from the ground level?
The ground level is floor level in that location. So we've basically had the basement slab comes up, right, and is flush with the floor into the 1.5 metre wall. On the other side, the apartment side, there's the lower floor level that exists. So we're slightly higher.
Right. Thank you. Kerry?
I appreciated Jill suggesting some compromises with some of the issues. I wondered about the waste room. Was that commented on? I know you talked about flipping the part of the building. That was commented on, but I don't know if you commented on whether or not you'd be able to remove the waste area to somewhere else.
Relocated, yeah.
Look, I'm open to looking at it. The indication I think from Jill was that I believe is that it would move to the eastern side. Was that correct?
Oh, well, another option may well be the basement, but there's then the issue of getting the bins to the street, I guess. Getting
it to the street, yes. It does appear very difficult to do so. I mean, the indication of that plant room is that it would need to be suitably ventilated via a mechanical system. So there may be ways that we could ensure, for example, that any potential odours are taken away through the mechanical system, which is dealt with above the car park level. So at the car park entry above that is a elevated plant room that is dealing with the mechanical services.
Right.
Could be potentially dealt with that way, so it moves away from the building. It's also quite low there again, so if you were to refer to the ground floor plan, when you come out the back of the building, which is a fire egress route only, there's no general access to that part of the building other than the waste or fire egress. Mm-hmm. You actually go down quite a bit from the floor level to get to street level, and there's a set of steps that achieve that. So again, there's the 1.5 metre boundary fence on our side, 2.2 on the apartment side. The waste floor level is much closer down to the level of Young Street. So it's even less visible, if that makes sense.
Right. So does that mean that the garbage bin's going down a ramp or downstairs?
The garbage bins themselves are being taken down a very gentle ramp to Young Street.
Oh, okay. And if you were to have the system that you mentioned then about making it smell less, does that generate extra noise?
No, it would be all dealt with within the existing plant room, which can be acoustically protected as it's within the built form.
Okay, because I always find, buzzing air conditioners, electric boxes, fans, all of that is just more irritation.
Absolutely.
And especially when it's acoustically sensitive as it is.
Mm-hmm.
I would hate to suggest one thing and turn around and create a problem.
No, understood. I mean, I could indicate to the roof plan, I don't know if you have A sheet 106 in front of you. Sheet A106.
Let me see.
Yep.
And what
I do.
What would be the over the driveway into the car park, which is the sort of very edge of the heritage wing that's being partially altered?
Yes.
We've got perforated roof sheeting over plant room. They would be acoustic louvers.
Right.
All plant room equipment would go in there, and there would, I understand, be a condition of consent regarding acoustic monitoring of the premises for occupation certificate anyway, and this would need to comply with those conditions.
Okay. While you're actually on that page, the chimney that's going to be impacted by that partial demolition of that area to put the driveway in, it says existing chimney to be dismantled and rebuilt or retained if possible. Have you estimated how possible that is?
We have some structural drawings about needling, which I believe are submitted to council at some stage. So there are structural drawings in place of how that could be achieved. It would be a very delicate exercise. So regardless, we are saying it will, if it cannot be dealt with on site, we will rebuild it in its existing form.
Right.
And in its existing location above the ceiling line, the roof line, sorry, so that in effect it will be as it was.
Okay. Before, right.
Before, yes. So if we will try to save it, there is quite a lot of work going on in that area, and I'll defer to any heritage comments from James Phillips. We have a structural methodology in place to support the portions of that are being retained. And again, in terms of a heritage comment, the entire western elevation of the building, other than the portion that is being changed for the car park entry, will remain as it is today.
Okay. And another suggestion was that the curve be lowered. How feasible is that, please?
Not feasible. So ceiling heights are at their lowest that we can really deal with in terms of compliance, and also access to light and amenity. And again, I would restate that curve is fully within the prior approved roof form by Williams Smart on that side.
I do take the point that was raised that it was a previous DA with, that people weren't around to object to. So I do find that difficult, although it was previously approved. The comparison, I can see why the residents would have objection to that being the standard at which everything's being compared to. The issue about the spotlights, is that something that, at night time, or, when it's, because the building will be open when it's dark in winter, are they...
I can respond to that quickly. We'd be more than happy to accept a condition about the management of lighting outside the operational hours. That is something that could be dealt with, both in terms of the time that light is used, but also the location and the direction in which lights are maintained. So we'd be happy to deal with that by way of a condition of consent.
Okay, thank you. And is the garbage, is the waste management, is that removed twice a week, once a week? Does anyone have an idea, please?
The waste collection will be a commercial collection. I expect it will be twice a week. In terms of the capacity of the bin room, and Andrew might be able to chime in, but I understand that the capacity is based on once a week.
Okay.
Yes, and a full waste management plan was provided with the DA.
Thank you. And deliveries, is everything expected to go through the garage?
No deliveries in the garage at this stage, is my understanding.
Okay, so that would mean that somebody would have to deliver things out on the street. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay, which is a complication of the parking and the narrow.
But I may defer to Tom Steele on that traffic engineering.
Tom?
Just in terms of deliveries, typically deliveries to childcare centres, in our experience, are only done by vehicles of van size at most, and they can be accommodated in the basement.
Okay.
Okay. I notice Mr. Cooper has arrived. So, Deborah, I wonder whether you would mind repeating your question on that if we've covered the other speakers.
Mr. Cooper, there was concern raised in some of the resident submissions that the noise logging exercise, surveys of ambient noise were undertaken during a period which, unavoidably was impacted by COVID and people's movements in relation to that. as well as the fact that not all people had moved in and the park hadn't reached its current level of usage and so on. So I wondered if you could just respond to that, to explain how that logging and the results from that data was adjusted to take into account those circumstances. And also if you could confirm that in terms of the logging, that the upper levels of the adjoining apartment buildings were taken into account.
Thank you. There was a meeting with council prior to the work being undertaken, and the exact question that Ms Laidlaw raised was raised at that meeting. The situation is that in the COVID situation, there is less traffic in the area, and the nearby buildings were not occupied, so there would be not noise generated from the use of those buildings. Accordingly, the background levels that were obtained would be lower than in post-COVID or pre-COVID conditions. That is, there's more traffic which would increase the noise, but the assessment was taken on the COVID background levels so as to be conservative, and it is identified on page 13 of the noise report. So our assessment actually has a safety factor so that when COVID is finally over, and we didn't know then and we still don't know when it is over, that the ambient noise levels will be higher and there will be less of an acoustic impact.
Okay. And in terms of accommodating and ensuring that upper levels of apartments are protected from noise, I'm thinking, I guess the building to the south is protection from the second level extension, but in terms of the building to the east, there's the elevated playground. Can you just explain what's proposed there in terms of attenuation and how those upper levels of the apartment that they have been taken into account in terms of ensuring that acoustic fencing is adequate?
Sure. If I can go with the latter part of your question first, there were measurements taken on the building to the south at the upper level for the purpose of determining ambient background levels, as well as locations on the ground level. And table 3 of our report in page 12 identifies the allocation of background noise levels applied to each of the different levels for the buildings. And it ranges from level 2 to level 7 that we have the design target, which will be in actual fact, higher noise levels because you're more exposed to the greater traffic. And so table 3 identifies the range of noise levels allocated for ground level, and it looks to the northern side of Yarraman Avenue, to the north of the site, the Grandview Apartments to the east of the site, Carrington Apartments to the south of the site, and future building on the corner of Young Street and Middle Street to the northwest of the site. So it was a matter that also was discussed with council about the approach that would be undertaken, and we've used those background levels. In terms of the analysis, the assessment looks at the children in each of the different individual play areas to determine the noise contribution with respect to the background plus 5 dB criteria. And there were barriers that were proposed. Those barriers have been modified during the course of the development, and also restrictions in the number of children so that it satisfies the background plus 5 criteria. So what we do is we work out a matrix of the different combinations for different ages of the play areas and number of children. Sorry. There was a message somebody exiting. And we look at the number of children for the different age groups because there are different noise levels allocated to the children. The older children create more noise than the younger children. And we work backwards as to what is allowed for the criteria. And it's a combination of number of children and the barriers to then satisfy the noise targets, which as I said earlier, are actually based on the COVID situation, which are lower than what is expected post-COVID.
Is it all compliant under the COVID situation? Yeah.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And so the way that the centres work and other centres is we work out the matrix for compliance, the number of children, the ages, and then the timetable is worked out by the operator that incorporates that. So the plan of management sets out the way that the centre will operate to be fully consistent with the noise criteria. They both go hand in hand, and so the plan of management is an essential document and it forms part of the approval consent conditions to comply with the plan of management.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Just one, if I may, to Mr. Cooper, just on the issue of the waste removal, the bins in and out on that side passage. Do you have any comment to make on the likelihood of nuisance of that occurring a couple of times a week?
Not specifically in terms of an analysis. The issue is that the criteria adopted by council and the courts in terms of childcare centres is a 15-minute level. So you have an intermittent noise that occurs, but when you take it over a 15-minute basis of an average, then it should be fully compliant. And the residents are above that area. So yes, there will be noise that will be audible. As to non-compliance with the criteria, that's certainly not expected.
Thank you. Panel members, any further questions?
Sorry,
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kerry.
Oh, it was just about the garbage noise. So can I just put that in layman's terms? Does that mean that even though a garbage being picked up at 6 a.m. in the morning wakes you up, it's over a 15-minute period, it's not really considered to be noisy, if you know what I mean?
I know what you'll mean. The issue is that if any activity occurs before 7 o'clock in the morning, it falls under different criteria for sleep arousal. And we have no instructions of garbage being picked up before 7 o'clock in the morning in terms of it. And it hasn't been assessed in terms of the sleep arousal criterion. When you deal in the period before 7, you are looking at the maximum noise level. After 7, in terms of normal business hours, you are talking about an average level that is assessed over a 15-minute period. That's the standard procedure of the council, the EPA, and the guidelines used for childcare centres.
I thank you. It's very complex.
Just a short comment on that. Again, we would be happy to accept a condition of consent on the hours in which waste is collected, not being before that 7 a.m. That causes an issue for sleep arousal.
Oh, well, but perhaps limiting it to daytime as defined by the EPA.
I have one additional question, if I may, Chair.
Please.
So there has been quite a bit of discussion about waste, and the architect was considering things, but I would like a response. Is there actually space within the basement to accommodate the bins? I mean, you made reference to ventilation systems, but I wonder whether there actually is space to accommodate those bins. Could you comment, please, Mr. Daly?
At the moment, I'd suggest not, without further expanding the basement. There's only one small area that we've allocated for any basement plant equipment or services, which is in the far northeastern corner of the basement. It could possibly go there, but at the moment we understand there will be electrical mains, there will be a whole lot of other requirements to go in there, and I think we're incredibly short on space. We're also very conscious of how close we are to the heritage item. So without expanding the basement, I'd say initially no.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask, what in the basement to the south of the ramp, what is that space? That's just a fire egress, is it?
It's a fire egress. We require 2 fire egresses from the basement.
Chair, if we finish,
I
just had one other thing. I'm not sure whether Andrew or Jeff, in terms of the required evacuation plan, was that incorporated in the plan of management, or is there a separate one?
You're talking about the flood evacuation?
No, evacuation, child evacuation, the emergency evacuation.
Yeah. I understand it's dealt within the plan of management rather than separately. I'd have to refer to it. My apologies. It's typically dealt with in the plan of management on these several Montessori childcare centres we've been dealing with. I can open it up and go to it if you like.
Well, I guess the specific is just the concern that often arises about the use of upper levels for childcare and how children get evacuated from the upper levels quickly and safely in the event of an emergency, and what consideration, and maybe Andrew could deal with that, has been given to that process.
Yes, I mean, I can't comment in terms of Jeff about whether that's been included in the plan of management or not. Montessori typically engage an evacuation specialist to prepare an evacuation plan of management that's specific. They usually do that during CC stage, but then they have general provisions in their plan of management as well. In terms of the design, the upper story has the lowest number of children in it, and they are the oldest. So there is...
okay, so they're... How old are they? They're the 5 and 6 year olds, are they?
Yes, so the most able-bodied, if you want to put it that way.
Okay.
And there are 2 exits from that floor, one through the heritage house and one through the rear stair, which connects out past the apartments and out to Young Street. So there are 2 points of egress from that floor that are quite significantly separated, so there should be plenty of time to move children either way. They're also the oldest children up there.
Sorry, I've just seen they're 4-6-year-olds.
4 to 6s, and the smallest group number, I guess.
So just to chime in, the plan of management has quite detailed provisions. In fact, I have it in front of me now. Section 16 of the plan of management deals with evacuation procedures, but then it refers also to Annexure H of that document, which is many pages of procedure. That deals with different types of emergency situations, stemming from the use of safe havens within the centre itself, through to moving children from those safe havens out to the street and to safe places outside the site once a risk passes. So it's dealt with in quite a bit of detail, and there's reference there to the childcare regulations as well, which deal with this topic.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I do have another question. I apologise. In the papers it says that the staff room may need to be moved. So I'm wondering if that happens, does that mean that some of the children will be, or, you know, an area of use, you'll have to swap over and have some of the children upstairs?
No,
Sorry, Andrew. That relates to accessibility. So essentially, what staff report has said is that there would need to be an alternative staff area were there a disabled staff member that could not use the upper level staff room. If that were to occur, then I would expect that would occur in the reception and meeting areas, admin reception area, which is at the ground level. Which would not obviously affect the area that's available to children for indoor play. So it could be dealt with within the existing confines of staff-related areas at ground level.
It does make me wonder with COVID as well, you know, and that reception area and the rules, and I know sanitising, etc., etc. I even wondered if that was a big enough area for people to be able to, you know, enter and leave and, you know, do all the things, sign in, etc., etc., that happens at a preschool like that as well. So thank you.
I think there was also a question that was raised during our briefing. There seems to be a slight discrepancy between the landscape plan and the architectural plan in terms of what I think is just that emergency egress from the southern end of the building. And it was a question of whether there's the required 1.2 metres for disabled egress effectively that way. The architectural plans seem to show a set of stairs that encroach on that, whereas the landscape plan suggests there's not as many stairs.
Andrew, can you deal with that? I see the areas you're talking about.
I'm just trying to track down the landscape plan. Sorry, one moment.
It's the architectural one that seems to show more stairs, and if that they are in fact stairs, it would mean that there's not the 1.2 metres required width for that egress.
There are stairs, yes, which I believe we need to achieve the levels, and particularly to suppress the levels of the waste stream there. However, there is an accessible egress route through the front of the building, which is fully on grade. So I'm not aware that all exits need to comply with that.
Okay, so you're saying 1.2 isn't required at that point?
I don't believe in that
egress.
location. Exactly, there's an alternate fully accessible path throughout the front part of the site.
Thank you. Panel members?
Sorry, just one more.
That's what.
We'll come to that.
Good.
Just on the fencing around the northern side of the building, I noticed that you've got standard fence designs with an open style, I presume it's metal palisade fence with glass behind, but the one on the northern side of the building says the typical detail is BAL 01.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, where is that detailed?
I expect BAL 01 will be at the upper level, so level 1.
No. BAL 01 is written on the fence that's going around the northern side garden.
Where the standard detail is that the sort of question?
Yeah, I can't see where the detail is.
Yeah, sorry, let me see what I can find. It should have been on that same sheet, so if it's not there, I'm not entirely sure why.
A200 gives the other two fence types, but it doesn't seem to give BAL 1.
It may not have been drawn in that detail then. Let me just, continue to have a look. Happy to supply a detail, or as it's intended to be a heritage fence, I believe it's drawn on A500. Are you provided with A500?
No.
No. We can provide A500. It essentially details what I'd call a heritage palisade style fence.
So the idea is...
Sorry, just to clarify, the council would have A500?
I believe so. If it's not,
yeah,
we would definitely provide it.
We'll be able to see that through the council offices after our meeting.
But it is an open palisade fence that's intended to allow a view through from the park to the frontage, to the
precisely.
northern elevation, and make sure that's unimpeded by a solid fence.
Precisely. So there will be open palisade with sort of alternating top up and then flat, sort of in that heritage style, with the perspex or glass behind it. We've actually designed quite a complicated fence in terms of there will be no frames supporting the glass, the acoustic fence above the line of the fence itself. So you will read the palisade and then cantilevered glass panels with a small silicon joint between the glass panels above them. So there's no bulky frame sitting behind the heritage fence to support the acoustic fence, essentially.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, panel members, any further questions of any of the speakers or those to answer questions? No, thank you. Do you have any questions of council officers in relation to this matter at the moment that you want to raise in the public forum? Or no? No, thank you.
Just the point made by the gentleman, Mr. Rogers, about the design excellence. Was there? I think he was saying there was a requirement in the LEP for a DCP.
Mr. Mead, I thought, answered that question. Did he not?
Sorry if I missed. No, I think he said it had gone to the panel, but I think the point being made by Mr. Rogers was that there is actually a requirement for a DCP for the site.
I can respond to that quickly.
Yeah.
There's a design excellence provision in the LEP, which is your typical design excellence provision. The matters for consideration under that have been dealt with in the DA documentation, including the statement of environmental effects. But process-wise, our first response to that was that we met with council both in a pre-application forum and after submission with their design review panel, and we say that simply elevates what we we said in our submission already, in that that panel made commentary on the scheme and we made changes in response to that commentary. So we say that any jurisdictional hurdle has been met by the documentation in terms of dealing with the RLPP clause, and also process-wise, it's a best practice process that we've proceeded through with Council's design review panel, despite SEP 65 and so on not applying to this type of development.
Okay, we'll have a check of that. But so it wasn't the case that the DCP requirement was met by a concept DA for the whole site?
There was a concept DA for the overall Newmarket site at the outset of that development. That led then to the DCP. There's the Newmarket DCP, which becomes a section of the overall Randwick DCP. And the proposal is obviously subject to the provisions within that. So there's a strategic design excellence process that was that was proceeded through in terms of arriving at the DCP that talks to the master plan for the Newmarket precinct. And then there's the DA process that requires, there's a standard design excellence clause per the standard template clause that sets certain jurisdictional hurdles for DA assessment. So you've got the strategic design excellence process and then the statutory design excellence process post lodging a DA. We say we've been through that second process in that the first process arrived at the strategic documents under which the development must be assessed, being the DCP first and foremost.
Thank you. I notice Council Officer William Jones has his hand up, and I was going to invite the council officers, if they wish to comment, to do so. So, William.
Thank you, Chair. Deborah, just in response to your question, I think you might be referring to clause 6.12 of the LEP that talks about the need for a site-specific development control plan in certain circumstances, and in one of the triggers is if the site area is 10,000 square metres.
Yeah, that's it. Mr. I'm sorry, just missed the date, isn't it? But he said on land for which a development control plan is required to be prepared under 6.12. That was the point made in the written submission by his company. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe 7 Young Street is quite a bit less than that specified area, 10,000 square metres, so it's not actually required.
And there is a DCP for the whole Newmarket site. Yes. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. If there's, Kerry?
Sorry. On that, that total complex, it says that the stable is going to be handed over to Randwick Council as a community centre. Is that true? Would you know, William?
That's a question we could take up with William perhaps after the meeting. I don't think it's
yes,
something the applicant can respond to. If there's no further questions from panel members, Mr. Cardos has his hand up, but I'm sorry, we can't take questions from the public at this stage. So we have now heard from all of the registered speakers, and I thank them all for their assistance, and I thank the applicants' representatives for their lengthy responses to the panel's questions. In accordance with the panel guidelines, the public meeting will now be closed, and the panel will move to a closed meeting to deliberate and vote on this matter. The outcome from our determination will be made available through the council website, either late tonight or tomorrow, and a recording, as I said before, a recording of this public meeting will also be available on the council website. Can I also thank council staff for their assistance with today's meeting, and I therefore declare the meeting closed at 2:21 p.m. Panel members, we will sign on to a separate meeting for our deliberations. Thank you all for your attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you.